When a 65-year married couple stepped onto the Family Feud stage, no one could have predicted that Steve Harvey would drop to his knees. The studio lights were bright, the audience was ready, and the game was about to begin like any other episode. But in less than 3 minutes, everything changed. Steve stopped mid-sentence, the cameras kept rolling, and what happened next became one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. This is not a story about winning a game. This is a story about what happens when love becomes visible, when decades of devotion speak louder than any scripted line, and when a man known for making millions laugh found himself unable to speak through his own tears. The Johnson family had been selected for Family Feud after months of waiting. Their application video showed a typical American family: kids, grandkids, laughter around the dinner table. But what the producers didn't know was that at the center of this family were Robert and Eleanor Johnson, married for 65 years, and that today would be their first time on national television together since their wedding day in 1958. Robert, 87, moved slowly but with dignity. His brown cardigan was the same one Eleanor had bought him for Christmas 5 years ago. She remembered because it was the year he forgot her name for the first time. Early-stage Alzheimer's, the doctor had said. Some days were better than others. Today seemed like a good day. Eleanor, 84, held his hand as they walked onto the set. Her lavender blouse was carefully chosen, her pearl necklace a gift from Robert on their 50th anniversary. She had been his memory when his began to fade. She had been his voice when words wouldn't come. And today, she would be his anchor one more time. Steve Harvey stood at his podium, smiling his signature smile, reading the teleprompter, ready to welcome another family. But when he looked at Robert and Eleanor standing at the red podium, something in their eyes made him pause. It wasn't nervousness. It wasn't excitement. It was something deeper. Something he couldn't name yet. "All right, Johnson family, welcome to Family Feud." Steve's voice boomed through the studio. The audience applauded. The game board lit up. Everything was going according to plan. But then Robert looked at Eleanor. Not at Steve. Not at the cameras. At Eleanor. And he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, "I'm so glad you're here with me. I don't know where I am, but I know I'm safe because you're here." The entire studio froze. Steve Harvey stopped mid-joke. His smile faded. The audience fell silent. And in that silence, something sacred entered the room. Steve had hosted thousands of episodes. He had seen excitement, nerves, competitiveness, joy. But this was different. This was a man with fading memory telling his wife that she was the only thing he was certain of. This was 65 years of marriage distilled into one sentence. This was love in its purest, most vulnerable form. Eleanor squeezed Robert's hand and whispered back, "I'm always here, sweetheart. Always." Steve looked down at his cue cards. The next question was written there. "Name something you might find in a garage." But he couldn't read it. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. He glanced at the producers in the booth. They were gesturing for him to continue. But Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on perfect timing and unshakable confidence, could not speak. He walked away from his podium. The audience murmured. The cameras followed him. And Steve Harvey did something he had never done in 14 years of hosting Family Feud. He stopped the show. "Hold on," Steve said, his voice breaking. "Just hold on." He walked toward the red podium where Robert and Eleanor stood. He didn't plan what to say. He didn't think about the cameras or the schedule or the network executives watching. He only knew that he was standing in the presence of something holy, and he needed to honor it. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. "Sir?" Steve said, looking directly at Robert. "How long have you been married?" 65 years. Eleanor answered for him, her voice steady but soft. 65 years this October. Steve exhaled slowly. 65 years. He repeated it like a prayer. "Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how beautiful that is?" Robert looked confused for a moment, his eyes searching Eleanor's face for context. She nodded gently, and he seemed to relax. "She's my whole world," Robert said. "I forget a lot of things these days. But I never forget her." Behind the scenes, producers were panicking. The schedule was falling apart. Commercial breaks were being rearranged. But Steve Harvey had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He wasn't going to move on. Not yet. The audience had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of waiting. The sacred silence of witnessing. Some were crying. Others had hands over their hearts. Everyone understood that they were no longer watching a game show. They were watching a love story reach its final, most tender chapter. Steve turned to Eleanor. "And you, ma'am? What's it been like? 65 years with this man?" Eleanor smiled, and in that smile was a lifetime. "It's been everything," she said simply. "The good days and the hard days. The days when we had nothing but each other, and that was enough. The days when we had everything, and he was still the only thing that mattered." Her voice wavered. "And now, these days, when he forgets things, he still remembers how to love me. And that's all I've ever needed." Steve Harvey, the man who had interviewed presidents and celebrities, who had filled arenas with laughter, who had never been at a loss for words, stood there with tears streaming down his face. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't apologize for them. He let them fall. "You know what you two are," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're what the rest of us are trying to be. You're proof that it's real. That love isn't just a word or a feeling. It's a choice you make every single day for 65 years. Robert looked at Steve, then back at Eleanor. "She chose me," he said. "I don't know why. But she did. And I've spent every day trying to be worth that choice." Eleanor's tears finally came. "You've always been worth it, Robert. Always." The audience erupted. Not with applause. With something deeper. A collective exhale. A shared understanding that they had just witnessed something true. The other family at the blue podium, the Johnsons' competitors, were crying too. One of them, a young woman in her 20s, whispered to her mother, "I want that. I want what they have." Steve turned to the cameras, his face raw with emotion. "You know what? I don't care about the game right now. I don't care about the points or the questions or any of it." He looked back at Robert and Eleanor. "I just want to thank you. For showing up today. For showing us what real love looks like. For reminding us what matters. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Steve Harvey reached up and took off his suit jacket. His signature gray jacket, perfectly tailored, the armor he wore every single episode. He folded it carefully and walked to Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said, "I want you to have this." He draped the jacket over her shoulders. "Because 65 years of loving someone the way you love him? That deserves more than a game show prize. That deserves everything." Eleanor looked down at the jacket, then up at Steve, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, Mr. Harvey, I can't." "Yes, you can," Steve said firmly. "And you will. Because you've earned it. Both of you have." Then Steve did something else no one expected. He lowered himself down. Slowly, carefully, he got on one knee in front of Robert and Eleanor. The 66-year-old host, in front of millions of viewers, knelt before this elderly couple as a sign of respect, of reverence, of recognition. "Thank you," Steve said, looking up at them. "Thank you for being an example. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for choosing each other every single day." Robert, in a moment of clarity, placed his weathered hand on Steve's shoulder. "Young man," he said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "You take care of people. I can see that. You have a good heart. Don't ever lose that." Steve Harvey broke. Completely, utterly broke. His shoulders shook. His hands covered his face. And the studio, the crew, the audience, everyone watched as one of America's most beloved entertainers wept openly, unashamedly, beautifully. When Steve finally stood, he wiped his eyes, looked at the camera, and said, "We're going to take a break. Because I need a minute. And I think you all do too. The cameras cut. But backstage, something extraordinary was happening. Crew members who had worked on the show for years were embracing. The competing family came over to hug the Johnsons. Producers who had been worried about the schedule were wiping their own tears. Someone brought water. Someone else brought tissues. And everyone, every single person in that studio, was changed. When they came back from break, Steve made an announcement. You know what? The Johnson family wins. I don't care what the score is. They win. Because they've already won at the only game that matters. The audience stood. A standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Not for a game show victory. For a love story that had endured 65 years of life's hardest tests and emerged unbroken. Robert and Eleanor left the stage that day with Steve's jacket, a $20,000 prize, and something far more valuable, the knowledge that their love had moved millions. The episode, when it aired 3 weeks later, became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. Social media exploded. "This is what love looks like," trended for days. Marriage counselors reported a surge in couples seeking help, saying they were inspired by what they'd seen. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. But the real impact happened quietly. Eleanor later told their daughter that after the show, Robert had one of his best weeks in months. He remembered details. He told stories. He laughed. It was like being on that stage, being celebrated for our love, reminded him of who he is, Eleanor said. It gave him back to me, just for a little while. Steve Harvey kept a photo from that day in his dressing room. Robert and Eleanor at the podium, hands intertwined, looking at each other like teenagers. He looked at it before every show. That's why we do this, he told his staff. Not for the laughs or the ratings. For moments like that. For reminders of what's real. In the weeks after the episode aired, something unexpected happened. Letters began arriving at the studio. Thousands of them. From couples married 50, 60, 70 years. From newlyweds who said Robert and Eleanor showed them what they were working toward. From divorced individuals who said they finally understood what they'd lost. From young people who had stopped believing in lasting love until they saw two people in their 80s holding hands like the world depended on it. One letter came from a hospice nurse in Oregon. She wrote that she had played the episode for a dying patient and his wife of 58 years. The man, who hadn't spoken in days, watched the entire thing. When it ended, he squeezed his wife's hand and whispered his first words in a week. That's us. He passed away that night, but his wife told the nurse it was the most peaceful death she'd ever witnessed. He remembered our love at the very end. She wrote to Steve. Thank you for giving him that. Steve read every letter. He kept them in a box in his office. On hard days, when the pressure of fame felt crushing, when the scrutiny of public life became too much, he would open that box and remember. Remember that what he did mattered. That showing up with authenticity, with heart, with willingness to break down on camera, that it all mattered. 6 months later, Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep, Eleanor's hand in his. The jacket Steve had given them was folded at the foot of their bed. At the funeral, their children read letters from viewers who had been inspired by their parents' appearance on the show. Marriages saved. Commitments renewed. Love rekindled. Eleanor lived another 2 years. On quiet evenings, she would put on Steve's jacket and sit in Robert's chair. She said it made her feel close to both of them, the man who had loved her for 65 years, and the man who had honored that love in front of the world. The jacket now sits in the Family Feud archives, a reminder that television, at its best, doesn't just entertain. It reveals. It connects. It shows us what matters. And that day, what mattered was two people who had chosen each other every single day for 65 years, and a host who had the wisdom to stop everything and bear witness to that miracle. Steve Harvey still talks about Robert and Eleanor. In interviews, at speaking engagements, in quiet moments with his own wife. They changed me, he says. They reminded me what I'm working toward. Not success. Not fame. That. What they had. That's the prize. Because in the end, the game didn't matter. The score didn't matter. What mattered was the moment Steve Harvey dropped to his knees and recognized that he was standing in the presence of something eternal. What mattered was that millions of people watching at home saw what 65 years of commitment looks like when it walks onto a stage holding hands. What mattered was that love, real love, the kind that weathers memory loss and aging bodies and decades of ordinary days, was seen and celebrated and remembered. And that jacket, hanging now in a glass case at the studio, is more than fabric. It's a symbol. A reminder that the greatest victories in life aren't won on game shows. They're won in the quiet, daily choice to stay, to love, to hold on. Robert and Eleanor Johnson won that game the moment they said, "I do," in 1958. Steve Harvey just made sure the world saw them claim their prize.